Welcome to the Studio B podcast. Today's episode is titled Educators and AI, Data-Driven Insights. We'll examine real-world data on educators' use of AI to uncover current issues and highlight possible solutions. We are the Learning Design and Digital Innovation team here at the Faculty of Education. My name is Eduardo. I'm a Learning Technology Specialist. And here I have two people joining me today. First, Bremen, my colleague, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Bremen. I'm a Learning Technology rover at LDDI.
And then today we have a special guest all the way from Barcelona, from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, Laia Alguacil. Hi, Laia. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, can you please introduce yourself very briefly, what you do, how you're here today?
Yes, of course. So I'm a PhD student back at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and there I also work as a teacher. So I do both research and teaching, and I specialize in digital technologies for education. So that's why I'm here. I'm doing my PhD stay here at LDDI. And today I came here to present some of the results that we did for a previous project we had about AI and higher education. So hopefully it'll be interesting.
Yeah. We're going to dive deep into those research findings.
Yeah.
It'll be very, very interesting for the audience as well, I'm sure. Okay, so we're going to start with a land acknowledgement. And Bremen, you're going to help us with that.
Absolutely. So, as we start our discussion here, I'd just like to acknowledge where we are. We're recording here on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. And as we continue with our discussion here, in which we're talking about another newcomer to this land, which is artificial intelligence, we really urge you to research and reflect on Indigenous perspectives on these topics.
Thank you, Bremen. So a couple of notes for the audience. We're going to have timestamps in the video description so you can navigate through the different sections. Also, we have links to resources and articles, things we're going to be referring to. And finally, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your community. Okay, so the format of this episode, here's how we're going to do it today. We'll look at data from a study at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and break it down into 5 parts, each tackling a key issue and exploring possible solutions. We'll reveal these issues in a moment. But let's begin with understanding the context of this research. So, Laia, maybe you want to share with us why this research was conducted and how it all started.
Yes, of course. So the research that we're going to present today is a small part of a bigger national project with funding from the Ministry of Universities in Spain. And the project is called Practices and Policies of AI Use in Higher Education. But today we're going to focus on what teachers know they use and where they stand in this thing of AI in higher education. Of course, there's a lot more perspectives to it, but we're just going to focus on that. And the reason why this project came to be is because when AI started to appear, people were using it, experimenting with it, and people were reflecting a lot on how it would impact education, how we could be using it. But we were lacking a lot of actual data on how people were using it and how it could affect, how it could transform education, especially higher education, right? So that's why the project started. It started few months ago, actually, but it takes time to design all the instruments and collect all the data. But the data is quite recent.
That's a great point because many times we read about how educators are using AI, but we haven't seen actual data,
right.
Not too much.
Right.
So this is what created that interest in finding the data.
Exactly. And the way we think it can be used can be extremely biased by our experiences and the experiences from people who surround us, which might be very different from different other areas of knowledge in university, right? It's not the same, the field of arts, whereas, engineering, it's very different. So that's why we needed to collect the different data. And 6 different universities participated in the study from all around the country. Mm-hmm. It's not that big of a country, but it is representing the diverse areas of the country. And about 700 participants, teachers, participated in the survey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even though we're talking about Spain, I think it represents what might be happening around the world.
Yes.
Right? In Canada, in different countries.
I think so.
Yeah. So let's begin by outlining these 5 issues that we'll be discussing. So issue number 1 is self-perception of general knowledge versus specific knowledge gaps. Issue number 2 is lack of training for technical and critical knowledge. Issue number 3 is questions of safe and confident use. Issue number 4 is changing student-instructor relationship. And issue number 5 is uncertain stances on academic integrity. So something that we did, we actually checked out this research and we identified these problems. Right? So we'll be describing in more detail what we mean by these issues, but the data is actually revealing that this is happening. And we also wanted to create something practical, so we came up with solutions for each one of these issues.
Yeah.
Great. So now we're going to go through the data from the study and navigate it through these different issues. So let's begin with issue number 1, self-perception of general knowledge versus specific knowledge gaps.
Yeah. So actually, the first question we ask teachers is how much they know about AI. So we ask the question, how would you define your knowledge of AI? And they had to identify themselves in a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is the lower level and 5 is the highest one. But they also had like specific descriptions of what each level meant. And as you can see, the results kind of show that most teachers, about 70%, are between levels 4 and 5, right? Where 4 would be, I have knowledge to explain it, perhaps informally, but they have enough knowledge to explain what AI is. And then number 5 would be, I have knowledge to explain what AI is. Not an informal context, but more so. They have enough knowledge to explain, like actually explain what it is, right?
So it seems like people think that they do know a lot about AI.
Right.
Brendan, what do you think about this graph?
Yeah, I think when we were discussing this and we kind of put together this graph kind of starts that self-perception idea that we talked about, that kind of was the guiding issue here, which is it seems like people have a pretty high perception of their own knowledge of AI. But as we're going to see in a moment with the other graphs, that might not translate into like specific competencies.
Yeah. And it seems to be very confident, right? If someone was to ask me, how confident are you about your AI knowledge? I wouldn't be sure to put myself into number 5. Yeah. You know, maybe around 3, 4, even though we've been exploring it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it seems like the teachers, like everyone knows what AI is, right? At least they know. That's what they say. But when we ask them if they know the difference between AI and generative AI, we didn't provide any definitions at this point in the survey. The results are a bit different already. So we can see how the percentages are a bit more dispersed. They're not as concentrated in levels 4 and 5. It's more actually the majority are between somewhat or quite well. They can tell the difference between AI and generative AI, which is still quite a basic concept. It's not very technical, right?
Yeah.
But we can already see a difference between the previous question and this question.
So it seems like there's that general understanding, but then even as we start to get into the weeds just a little bit, people start to step back and think, wait a minute.
Right. Yes. And if we go to the next question, which here we're going to start to see a bit more of what you were saying before, we asked them how familiar they are with some AI terms that, well, some like technical aspects, technical terms that can relate to AI. We asked about algorithms, prompts, machine learning. You can see them here in the graph. What you can see here is the different terms. Here is the means, the results, and here is the percentages of how they identified whether they were familiar with it or not. Again, it was a scale from 1 to 5, and these were the descriptors for each level. And here we can start to see some interesting things. So the one they seem to be most familiar with are both algorithms and prompts, because we can see that the mean is very high, and then the results for scale 4 and 5 are also pretty high. But then we can start to see some other concepts that are not as clear, perhaps. For example, the concept of hallucinations. There is about 36% of teachers who have never heard about this term, right?
That's pretty problematic, because normally you come across a lot of hallucinations when you look into how to use AI in education, if you're getting references or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting LLM, which pretty much all of the AI that people are going to be interacting with on a daily basis is probably large language models, LLMs. So that also, it's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah. Maybe people are more familiar with the term prompt, right? Because I'm prompting ChatGPT or something like this. And it makes sense that algorithms is the first one, because people know that from, the YouTube algorithm or the Instagram algorithm is a common term.
Exactly. Yes. But yeah, some of them are very surprising. And it doesn't necessarily mean that teachers need to know exactly what these terms are down to a very technical level. But you see, level number 5 would be that they have knowledge to explain the concept and know how it relates to AI, right? So as you were saying before, for example, LLMs are very necessary to understand the most typical AI tools that teachers use. So that is quite something to look into. And it's kind of, you can read this, comparing this results versus the first question, how much knowledge do you have about AI? So perhaps they perceive that they have a lot of knowledge about it, but it comes down to more specific terms. Maybe they don't have that much knowledge, right?
Yeah, and that's when we come into the term of self-perception of general knowledge.
Right.
Yeah, there seems to be a discrepancy.
Yes, exactly. That's it.
And it's no one's fault because you only know what you know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So what that shows is, again, what we identified is that gap of knowledge, which perhaps we're not aware of, but it seems to be there, right? And with regards to the same issue still, we ask them about what they feel their competence level is regarding generative AI in teaching. And as you can see here, the results are a bit lower even than the previous ones we've seen. So here, of course, there's a difference between knowledge and competence. Competence requires more of complex, right, mental processes. So of course, it makes sense that it is lower, but you can definitely see that when it comes to comparing knowledge versus actual use of like competence of using these tools, results seem to be lower.
Yeah, and I think especially that level 5 description there of that developing regulations, like to some extent as higher educators or post-secondary educators, you will have to at least develop a minor level of policy regulation for your class, a syllabus statement or, your position on academic integrity issues with AI. So it would be good to see people moving more towards that. And I think what this research really is highlighting is that when you ask yourself these questions, you will identify those knowledge gaps. So it's kind of like, yeah, you only know what you know until you ask yourself, wait, okay, could I actually, if I made an AI policy statement, how informed would it be by my knowledge about AI? And that's when you can start to be like, oh, I should look into this, I should look into that. And you could do that research for yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah, that self-reflection is important. And that connects to the solutions that we'll be providing in a minute.
Definitely, yes. So just to wrap up those 3 major data we provided in a compared kind of graph, we can see that the highest points would be given to the perception of knowledge about AI. But then when we ask about the specific differences between AI and generative AI, it's already lower. And then when we ask about the perception of competence, it is significantly lower. So this is just to wrap up the ideas that we presented and to lead to sort of the conclusions you were already stating.
So what can we do to mitigate this issue? Any ideas?
I mean, yeah, there's that self-reflection part that I think this research really is kind of showing us, that when you ask those questions of people that are a little bit more in depth, it prompts self-reflection. You can do that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Also working on the AI literacy piece.
Yeah, and we have some resources for that.
Yeah, definitely. You can check the other podcast episodes that we have recorded. We have one on UBC guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think one major thing is because it is natural to think or perceive that you know a lot about AI because it is going on and it's kind of everywhere and it's taking over every conversation almost. But it's kind of the similar concept of, which has shown to be not true, of the digital native, that the fact that you're born surrounded by technologies doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have the competences to use those technologies, right?
Like familiarity is not the same thing as literacy yet.
Definitely, yes.
Mm-hmm. So the learning piece is really important here in this case.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And hopefully we can put a few resources in the description as well to just quickly look through. I found a few that UBC recommended that give a little bit more of a technical description of generative AI. And you can look through there, see which terms you're like, wait, I don't know what that term is, and use that as a bit of a look through for your own competencies.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. This way people can make sure that they're actually engaging with the information that will help them to increase their literacy. Great. Let's continue with issue number 2, lack of training for technical and critical knowledge.
So actually, right after we ask them how much they know about AI, how familiar they are with those terms, we asked them whether they had received training specifically related to AI for teaching, right? And about 58% said they have received training, and about 42% said they haven't received training, which is kind of half yes and half no. And then we asked them also whether their university offers training. If they know if their university offers training, of course, this is based in the Spanish context again. But about 56% of people said yes. But surprisingly, about 39% of people said, I don't know. So the percentage of no was very, very small, but the percentage of I don't know was surprisingly large.
Yeah, that's most likely a yes.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. These universities are all going to be providing some training.
I cannot think of, nowadays, and, it's been a while now. So
Even if you compare both of them, you'll see the yes is almost the same. So it doesn't make sense that the I don't know and the no is coming up to the no using the first one.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah, we would have to check whether there is an actual correlation. That's very interesting. But yes, it kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. So that's something to think of, maybe the way we are sort of promoting that training. If it's not reaching teachers, we should explore a bit more what the issue is there, but they seem to be unaware of that training.
It might be a communication issue.
Exactly. Could be. And then we asked them what type of training they had received. This was a multiple choice question where they could mark as many as they had received. And the results show that the most common training is instrumental. That would be a training where you learn how to use a specific AI tool. For example, how to use Copilot, if that's the tool that you're using in your university, for instance, that works with the system within your university, for example. And then the second most common was the pedagogical type of training, where you learn how to use AI for teaching purposes. So, for example, you could learn how to create a prompt to design a teaching unit, for example, or how to create a prompt to come up with a rubric that will fit your needs, right? And then a lot less common were the types of training that were sort of reflective, where you explore the limitations, the ethical issues, you develop your own critical opinion about AI, so it's sort of where you stand with this AI issue. And then the least common was the technical type of training, which sort of relates to the technical concepts we saw earlier on. In this type of training, you would learn about the technical aspects of AI, so knowing how it actually works and understanding how, when you're asking something, how it's going to work out the response, right?
So this makes sense to me because instrumental and pedagogical connect to education.
Yes.
However, we have the one on reflection that connects to ethics. How important is that in education? What do you think?
Extremely important.
Yeah, especially like right now, we're kind of at this like turning point or inflection point with AI where it is being adopted wide scale. So this is the moment when we're going to set precedent for those kinds of things. And like teachers right now are going to be influencing future teachers by what they decide. So I think it's more important than ever to be reflecting on this and, not necessarily just, okay, how can I use this quickly to, give myself a boost?
Yeah. Absolutely, because you can understand how I use this as an instrument, how I use it for teaching and learning, but you might be missing the ethical points, the ethical issues, and that's a big concern. We have a podcast episode on ethical issues, so make sure you take a look at that.
Definitely.
We do have training at BC, if you were not sure.
Yeah, that's very important. And also to remind everyone that training can come in very different forms. Right? Perhaps a workshop, which is more like organized, but it can also be different forms of like documents or resources that can be available. So training can come in different shapes and forms, right? And the way I see it, when you design or ask for instrumental or pedagogical training, it's sort of giving you a quick solution to the problem you have. So I want to know how to use AI to design a case study, for example. So it kind of solves that issue. But reflective and technical take a bit more time. But those are the two that will actually help you make informed decisions. So the first two, I think, solve the temporary issues and the quick things you might need to apply to your teaching. But the other two, even though they take more time, they can help empower teachers, I would say.
Yeah. It sounds like the training has been focusing on the how a lot, but not necessarily the why and the when of AI. which are also really important questions.
One last question we asked teachers is what they would feel they would need more training. So what they're lacking to know. And surprisingly, they don't really know what they would need more training on. So their typical answer, the most common answer, is more training in general about AI and teaching.
Yeah, that's a little vague.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know like on ethics or pedagogy or something like that.
Exactly.
And even then, the response rate for this open-ended question was actually just pretty low generally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Which is common with open-ended questions in general. But
This one's even lower than some of the others, though.
But yes, it is definitely. But then when they did know what to answer, the results are mostly to create teaching resources, to learn how to detect the use of AI, which is interesting. We'll touch on that later on. Then interesting, they would like to know more technical aspects of how generative AI works, which relates to the low training on that. That might be something to look out for. Then how to use it responsively, how the appearance of AI changes teaching, which this again relates to the reflective type of training, right? So we do see some relationships between what they need to know and the type of training they have received, but we still see that the most common answer is, I don't know, just more things in general, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if people wanted to mitigate this issue, what could they do? Well, the issue is about training, so definitely accessing training.
Yes.
And I think that now as we are entering this AI era, we're getting more and more training. Here at UBC, for instance, we have tons of trainings at CTLT, also with us, LDVI. You can contact us if you want us to join your classroom, for instance, if you're teaching here at the faculty, and we can do a training for you. What else can we do to improve this?
Well, I think, like Eduardo was just saying, requesting training, I think specifically we were mentioning about how certain types of training is potentially lacking. So I think I know instructors are so busy, but I think it is worth it to spend a little time now to save you a lot of time in the future.
Yes.
By just like spend a little bit of time now that AI has kind of been around for a little while, thinking about the use cases and, where it would be helpful to receive training, and put forward a request. If you're in the Faculty of Education, you can throw us an email, but do reach out to every department at UBC has learning technology team. And I would guess that every university has learning technology teams that if you throw them email saying, this is how I've been thinking about using AI, could you please do a quick walkthrough with me or workshop with my class? People will be so happy to do that.
Definitely. Yeah. I would also say that if you can, of course, this might be hard because everyone has different schedules and everything, but if you can somehow request a training at the department level or faculty level, that would be really interesting, so that we sort of navigate through, like, following the same lines, and we develop sort of a department culture where we see things similarly and work similarly as well, not just at your course level, but at the department level. I think that's very important for like the culture of the organization in a way.
Yeah, and back to what you were saying, Bremen, it will involve some time. People need to invest time. And I think that's the difficult part, because I've been a teacher as well. And sometimes when you need to do trainings, it's like, oh, now I have to invest more time in this, like learn more things. But I think in this new era of AI, AI is here to stay. So people will have to make that investment, but hopefully to save time in the future and become more efficient. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. Okay, now we move on to issue number 3, questions of safe and confident use.
Right. So the next question we ask teachers is, okay, do you use AI for teaching? Yes or no? And the results show that about half use it and about half don't, which I don't know how it might seem to you, but to some it might seem like a lot, to some not that much. I'm not sure. But then we ask them, okay, but like for the teaching sequence, in what parts do you use AI, right? Because if you think about teaching, you can have like the planning phase, the actual in-class lesson part, you can have assessment, you can have tutoring your students, right? So we ask them according, like to in each part of the teaching sequence, how frequently, so how often they would use AI. And those are the results we got. So how do we read this graph? Okay, here we have like the different sequence, again, the different phases of the teaching sequence. So the planning, being in class, the assessment, tutoring and doing activities with students. So asking your students to do something. And these are the frequencies, right? So never in some particular lessons, for about half the lessons, for almost every lesson, and for all my lessons. So even though about half teachers say they do use AI for teaching, when we ask them how often for the different parts, what we see is that they never use it, right? Especially they do use it more for the planning or in-class parts, because these are a bit more frequent. But for assessment, we see assessment and tutoring, we see that it's almost never used, right? What do you think about these results?
I wonder what might be happening in this case. I'm wondering if perhaps they say, yes, I'm using AI, but once you're hit with the question of how you're using it, you might be hesitant, like, oh, I don't want, is this all right, So there might be a transparency issue here.
Might be.
Or it could also be that they're using AI for something different and something more basic, so to speak. I think we were discussing that previously, right, Bremen?
Yeah, that there's a possibility that they use AI on a day-to-day basis in their teaching, in work, but aren't necessarily using it for these specific situations. Or if they are, it's very rare.
Right.
Like we're seeing okay, maybe I use it for, a specific lesson. And I think that's where we kind of got to this issue of, are people feeling confident that they're using AI safely?
Right.
Because there's this gap between, oh yeah, I use it, but then I'm not so sure if I feel comfortable saying that I use it for my, lessons, because how does that make me look? And that reflects that they're not sure that what they're doing is actually safe.
Yeah. And that's why the training is important. Yeah. Because if you understand that you're using AI safely, then you'll be transparent in your use.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. And if you know what it implies to use it safely, then you can make that choice of using it or not using it. So again, kind of relates to the technical types of training and the reflective types of training, right?
Yes.
Definitely. So as we see, it's not as common or as systematically used as we could think of based on the previous results. It seems to be more of a very specific use, at least when we give them these options of answers, of course, right? The next thing we ask them is for which teaching tasks do you use AI for? So the previous question was more thinking of the sequence, the parts of the teaching sequence, but these are like activities you do as a teacher in general. So they could click as many as they use AI for. And as we can see, the most common one is to adapt materials, followed by creating teaching materials, which is kind of similar. And also next followed by creating assessment activities and creating assessment instruments. And then the fifth one, being still quite frequent, is looking for references. Then after that, we would have structuring presentations. And then less common would be to structure and organize the lessons. And then the least common is to give feedback and to actually grade or mark an activity.
And remember, there was about 750 or so participants. So what you're seeing here on the numbers, that's out of the 700 or so responses. This is how many people use these.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of people looking for references, and we also saw that many of them didn't know the concept of hallucination.
Right.
That can be problematic. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be
dangerous combination. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. And then, mostly we can see it's related to the material aspect of teaching, which makes it, then we'll see the same thing again in some other questions, but it just makes it more efficient to create those materials and the assessment activities as well. They find it more efficient.
Okay, so what solutions can we offer people in this case?
So in terms of use case, for AI, I think you want to be potentially more intentional about how you're using AI for specific tasks. As you two pointed out about that idea of hallucinations together with trying to find references, maybe for being more intentional, we would see the number of people using it for that use case go down, whereas other cases where it actually is working it really well would go up. So you would kind of hope to see that when people know that something is safe and are being confident about their use, or know that something is unsafe, they would, there'd be a high number of people on those ones at the top, and it would be a little bit more distant for the ones at the bottom, but it's still kind of this gray area, it seems like. Is that what you're reading from these results?
Yeah, totally. I would say that as one solution, which might seem very obvious, but I think it is where we should start from, is to, again, going to the intention part, is to think of, again, when we use any technology, right? So think of why you would use it, so for what pedagogical purpose you would be using that, and then think of how it will affect any aspect in teaching, right? So for example, if you're creating an assessment instrument, I'm thinking it's going to be the instrument you're going to be using to assess your students' work, right? So it is quite big. It is very important. So just be mindful of how you are creating that assessment instrument, because it can be dangerous. Like, it's not the same if you give it specific criteria related to what you've been working in class and the learning outcomes of the course, and you review the instrument. Like, it's not the same if you do all that, the amount of information it's coming from you versus from what AI generated in the first prompt you gave it. You really think about that, I would say.
Yeah, it depends how you're using the AI. But also, I think interesting that you pointed out about like the designing instruments. I think designing instruments for like assessment, which is like grading, was actually pretty high.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh yeah, I'll make a test using AI, but then grading is really low. But to me as a student, I'm thinking, if my professor made a test using AI, designed the questions using AI, then my grade is the result of something that AI did. So in some ways, I am being graded by the AI. So to me, I think that seeing that be so high indicates to me that maybe some instructors aren't thinking about those kind of connections or consequences of the use in an intentional way. And so it's a little bit concerning there.
Yeah, it all comes down to awareness as well. If I am using it for this purpose, what are the potential issues I could come across? Yeah. So,
Definitely.
So now we move on to issue number 4. This is an interesting one. Changing student-instructor relationship.
Yeah. So we asked teachers to what degree they think that AI impacts the relationship between teachers and students. And results might be a bit concerning. You might see them that way. So these are the results which basically show that almost every teacher stands from a 3 to 5. So in the neither agree, disagree, or agree part, right? So people who disagree are a lot less common than people who agree with that. And then we asked them why. So why to that question? So why does it impact the relationship, or why it doesn't? And the reasons why they think it does impact, they say the most common answer refers to the lack of trust in this relationship. They also say that teachers lose contact with students. They have less contact with students because they prefer to ask AI rather than ask their teachers. They also said that the syllabus needs to be updated and the teacher role needs to be reconsidered. And of course, that's going to be changing the relationship between teachers and students. Then they also referred to the lack of own reflection and competence development by students, which also relates to the issue of trust, right? So the way that students are learning seems to be affecting that relationship as well. Then other people, a bit more optimistic, but still less common, said that relationships are now, instead of more vertical, they're more horizontal, because the teacher is not anymore the person who has the knowledge. They can both have access to that knowledge. So they said that relationships are more equal. And then some other people said that, but again, a lot less common, that students and teachers now have more time to interact because they can dedicate other tasks, like delegate tasks to AI. So now they do have more time. So those are a bit contradictory with the previous answers, but again, less common, right? And then we asked them why they think it does not impact, because they could answer it does or it doesn't. So the reasons why it doesn't, they said that AI will never substitute a teacher. That's the most common answer. And then some others said that the pedagogical or digital tool is one thing and the relationship is another. So there are two separate things, the way they see it. Then others, they said it depends on the course or on the assignment. It's going to be different for each case. Some others refer to the lack of interest, of their own interest or knowledge about AI. So they don't see a change because they don't care about it. Mm-hmm. And some others said that they just haven't perceived any changes. So what do we think about that? A lot of information, I would say, in there.
Yeah, a lot of conflicting viewpoints,
yes,
which is very interesting to see, of course. But also definitely based on the overall data we saw in the last question of just like, do you think that the relationship is changing? The majority are kind of either in the middle or really, yes, it is changing. And so maybe even though there are some naysayers, the majority are feeling that. And that certainly has some weight in terms of what's happening in classrooms.
Definitely. So it's an issue we need to address.
Yes.
We cannot look the other way because it's clearly concerning. In what way or another, it's clearly concerning. Then in relation to the trust issue, we asked a question of how teachers interact with AI tools and how they think students interact with those tools, right? So we gave them different options, which again, one option is not necessarily better or worse than the other, but we could certainly say some are more complex, right, than others. So in this graph, what you can see in blue is the answer of how teachers interact with AI tools, and in orange is how teachers think students interact with AI tools, right? So the most common way for teachers to interact with AI tools, we would say, is the most complex option, which is they refine prompts until they obtain a satisfactory answer, and then they modify this answer according to whatever they need, right? But when we ask teachers how they think students interact, they say they create a simple prompt and stick to the first answer.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Because even normally, usually younger people tend to be more tech savvy. So they probably already have better methods for interacting with a chatbot.
Yeah.
But the impression from instructors is perhaps that students are sort of using AI to cheat, to get a quick answer, to skirt around the system and not have to study. So that's because that's the impression, perhaps, and that's what I get from this data.
Yeah,
it could also be based on what they got, because sometimes you see some content and you know, oh, this is AI generated.
Okay, right.
And normally that's with one prompt.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a bit of a, like, they're only identifying the bad use of AI, and they're not actually realizing how many students are using AI to study and on the side and to edit and to improve their work and, in these more complex ways.
Oh, yeah, it could be that, yeah.
Because it's not being seen. It's not obvious to detect that when you receive an assignment.
Right. So I don't know what the reason behind this big difference might be, but for sure, I think what it shows is, again, this issue with trust in their relationships, right? Because the way they see that students are using AI is in the most or almost simplistic way out of every option, as opposed to the way their proficiency in using AI is a lot more complex, right? So there seems to be a big gap there from the perspective of teachers. We also said it would be interesting to see what students think, right? How students think they use it and how about their teachers are using it. We don't know, but there seems like these results show, again, the issue of trust, which is affecting the relationship, right? And as a teacher, it is almost inevitable now to read through some of the assignments and constantly be asking yourself, did they use AI for this? Like, even though you want to trust your students and you don't want to go there, your brain automatically goes there.
Yeah, that's happening all the time now.
Yes.
And it's difficult to identify, especially if they have prompted many times. You can really refine the content until there's no way of recognizing it was made by AI.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can upload as many resources as you'd like. So it can refer to many of the contents you used in that class if you upload the presentations or the instructions of the task. So the more specific you are, the more it can actually relate to what you did in class, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So eventually maybe this will evolve into not the question of was this generated by AI, but how effectively did they use AI to create something. You know what I mean? Yeah. When it comes to assignments and work done by students.
Definitely.
At least that should be a conversation. Like if there's changes are going to happen, there should be a conversation between students and teachers about, hey, this is the expectations. Yeah.
Definitely. But to do that, you need to have your own stance with the issue of AI, right? So know what is okay, what is not okay. And yeah, so referring again to the competence question, it's sort of stating policies for your own course, right? That requires competence. Definitely.
Okay, so what solutions can we offer in this case? I think having a conversation with students is essential.
Yep.
We were calling that the AI talk.
Yeah, right. How to talk with your students.
Okay.
Yeah, and have that up front when the term begins. Even if you have some policy already in place, that conversation needs to happen, because we've seen cases of teachers who do have like a policy AI statement in their syllabus, and then they still run into these issues. And maybe in the future, as people will be more accustomed to AI, the conversation is not as needed, but at this point, it's really essential.
Yes. And just keep in mind that it might not be one conversation that you have at the beginning of the course, but it might be kind of an ongoing...
Yeah, each assignment.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With individual students who have questions about it, like be open to that. And just acknowledge that there is this changing relationship as you are designing things, as you're talking to students. I think even though it seems like this is so scary, like there's this AI coming and it's disrupting things, it could, it's not guaranteed that it's a negative impact on the teacher-student relationship. It could be positive, but regardless, you have to know about it and, acknowledge it in order to navigate it successfully.
Well, definitely. I think we saw from the responses some potentials. Some said that they might have more time to engage with the students now. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
And they can go deeper into that relationship and find new dynamics and different things that will be hopefully useful to them.
Definitely. And to add to that, I would say that perhaps sometimes we have like a problem with that, or we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to become vulnerable. But I think it's very important to have the same conversation or similar that you would have with your students, with your colleagues as well. Like see how you're dealing with this in class and like sort of learn from each other. I think it's very important because we can give each other tips. Like we're sort of going through the same things, right? So it's important to sort of build network and be there for each other. I think it's very important.
And that's that transparency piece, once again, which connects to knowledge, to understanding.
Definitely.
Right? Because people can be hesitant to share that they have been using AI or they plan to use AI in their teaching, even with the students, even more, I would assume. But if you have a good framework, then it should be fine. Okay, and finally, issue number 5, uncertain stances on academic integrity.
Right. So this will perhaps reflect a lot of the previous results we already went through, because it's the way where they stand, right, in this issue of, well, not issue, but the topic of AI in teaching and learning in the context of higher education. So we ask them a very, I would say, common question to ask is whether they penalize their students if they use AI, yes or no. And about 35% said yes, they do penalize, and about 65% said no. So we kind of delved into the reasons why and in which situations they penalize and what is the penalty. So in which situations they penalize. So they said when it is a clear case of plagiarism, non-ethical use of AI, or academic fraud. Then they said they also penalize if they see clear lack of critical reflection and authenticity from students, or directly straight copying from a source, that they would penalize. If it is unauthorized use of AI and it has been explicitly prohibited, then of course they would penalize. If they feel like the use they did of AI is incorrect, if it's misuse, or if they're not acknowledging the fact that they have used AI, right? And then other teachers said if they use it too much. That's also a case. And then we asked what the penalty is they apply. And mostly you will see it's failing a task or counting the task as it's not presented or it has no grade. So it counts as if they didn't do the task. That's for about half the people who answered, which again, for an open-ended question is a lot. Some people said they would give the students a lower grade than an actual, like if they hadn't used AI, they would received a lower grade. And then some others said they must repeat the task again without using AI this time. And others said it kind of depends on the situation, right?
So this is interesting because we saw that actually a bunch of people said, no, I don't penalize at all. But among those who do, half just fail you.
Yeah.
So this is where we see, okay, the stances are very mixed. And as a student, I'm like, oh God, this is kind of, it's intimidating.
Yeah.
I don't know where my instructors are going to stand on this.
Right. So then we asked them why they would penalize and why they wouldn't penalize. And if we go through the answers, the reasons why they penalize is the lack of own critical thinking or the lack of personal reflections. They want to see that in the work of students. And if they're not seeing it, then they would penalize. They said AI can be used if it's acknowledged, if it's used critically, if it's well used, and if it's not used excessively. So if these are not the cases, then they would penalize.
Say well used and excessive are very subjective terms.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows what they mean?
Yeah. And somewhat using AI, but still using your own critical thinking. It's not necessarily exclusive. So some of these are, interesting to look at. Some others said that students must be penalized if authorship is not acknowledged, if they see lack of honesty, integrity, again, those ethical aspects of academic integrity, if they see clear lack of effort from students, interesting, and if it doesn't comply with the course rules or the task instructions, again, where they take a stance. And the reasons why they don't analyze, some people said it depends on how AI is used. And some others said that AI is like any other tool, which can be used and can be useful. Some said that students need to know about it and know how to use it. And also interesting, some said that they don't penalize because it's hard to identify whether they're using it or not, right?
I think it's interesting how low the response rate was on the question of why don't you penalize. So that tells me that there's a lot of instructors out there who don't penalize for AI, but then when you ask them why, they just kind of go and run away from the question.
Right. It's kind of hard to make decisions. I feel like it's hard for them to make a decision in that area, which might be the reason why they just prefer not to penalize, because they don't want to get into trouble.
Yeah. As some instructors have.
Right.
And they might have heard that in the news.
Yeah, definitely. So with relation to the aspect of identifying the use of AI, that being sort of a difficult thing to identify, like teachers cannot say 100% sure students used AI and therefore they can fail and perhaps they don't want to get into trouble. We also asked them if they had strategies to identify the use of AI from students, and about 40% said yes and about 60% said no. Some of these answers are pretty divided and half, kind of. And then we also asked them which strategies they have to detect the use of AI. And mind you, this was an open-ended question again, so they didn't have answers. They just wrote whatever, and then we grouped into different answers. And the most common seems to be AI detection tools. Mm-hmm. And then themselves identifying certain AI writing patterns, be it like typical expressions or vocabulary, or even some like points or things that AI tends.
Punctuation.
Exactly, thank you. Tends to use. And then others said they would contrast the learning or what they see in the task with speaking to students and see if it's sort of along the same lines or if it's a very big difference, comparing the task to other tasks that students at that level typically do, or other tasks from the same student when they're in question, right? Or even teacher intuition. They leave it to intuition. So those are some of the strategies that they are using to identify the use of AI.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you a question, both of you. In your case, how do you normally detect AI content?
tricky. Very tricky.
Tricky, because I'm thinking like detection tools, haven't used many of them, but I know they're not as efficient.
Oh, yeah.
It's really difficult for them to identify AI content.
Yeah.
So I normally tend to identify the patterns as well in the writing.
Yes.
Or even with an image, it's easier to see that it was AI generated.
Right.
What do you do?
Yeah, sorry, just to add, most of we asked them in different questions that we didn't put all the questions there, but we asked them what type of generative AI tools they would typically use, and most of them are text. So because now you were saying that with images it might be a bit easier, but with text it might be a bit harder, but it seems to be that what they use most is text, right? So an issue here is identified. For me, I personally teach first year students, so they are 18, and they just entered university, so their notions about pedagogy and education are not necessarily very complex. So if we do see very complex terms or very complex reflections, it's usually not what they would say to me in class, because they're not there yet, and that is okay. That's natural, right? So if we see that it's too complex, perhaps I would go back and talk to the student, and then...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm so surprised. To me, like, my number one AI detection tool, ask the person who made the content, did you use AI?
Yeah.
And then if they say no, okay, explain it to me.
Definitely.
And if they can't, then they probably used AI, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised that isn't, talking to the student isn't even on the list above 9% of people who said they have tools.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Yes. And if it's there, it's not as in talking to them, it's as in contrasting the learning, which is a very different approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. And then following that question, did you use AI for this task? Yes or no? Then I would ask, and how did you use it?
Right.
So, and some of them would say, I didn't. So, for example, I'm thinking about a specific task where they need to reflect on what they did in the class, like the practical activities they did in class, right? And then they would say, I didn't know what I learned, so I asked it for ideas, but then I wrote it, and I'm like, okay, but what I want to be hearing is what you learned from yourself. Like, I want you to be making those connections. And then if you have trouble developing the ideas and sort of putting words into your thoughts and you're using it for that, then it's very different. But I want to hear the learning from you, not the learning from AI.
Yeah.
So it's going to depend a lot on the task.
It sounds like in your class, you were potentially having that transparency with your students and being open to them sharing that they did use AI. And I think that's another thing that, when I said nobody's talking to their students, I understand that instructors are busy and they can't one-on-one with, they might have 300 students in their class. But that's not necessarily the only form of communication. Like, you can put something in your assignment that says, I'm okay with you disclosing your use of AI, and you're not going to just be penalized for touching ChatGPT. Right. And then building that transparency, you can detect AI use. The detecting AI use doesn't necessarily mean you're detecting it to penalize them. It might just be detecting it so that you have knowledge of what your students are doing and you can design the assignment to work with that, right?
Definitely. And that sort of goes back to the trust issue of the relationship, because I would be in class, they maybe are working in groups and discussing a few questions they would have to later debate within the whole group. And I would see them having their computers on with ChatGPT open, right? So I'm very comfortable with going around and saying, if you don't mind closing, you don't need your device right now, right?
Right.
But even more, you don't need ChatGPT open right now, because what I want you is to have a conversation and build from your own ideas. You don't necessarily need to be using that now. And that sort of helps them understand when it is okay or when it is expected from them to be using AI or not. Also, some of them want to do great in school, right? Like, their students, they're motivated to do well. So they will tell me, I tried to do the reflection by myself, but it looked really bad. And then I asked ChatGPT and it was so beautiful. So I just said, oh my God, I need to turn in the beautiful, the nicely developed reflection. But that's not necessarily what I want to be hearing. I want to be hearing from their own learning, because that's what it's showing me, what they actually learned, right? It's two very different things. So not necessarily going to the assessment part, but going through the daily things that happen in the class and sort of letting them know when it is okay to use it, like for what purposes. Also, because they're going to become teachers, right? So going back.
And education, yeah.
Exactly. Like my students are going to be primary, like here you call it elementary school teachers. So it's essential, right? So finally, the last piece of data we're going to be sharing with you today is we asked them what changes they made to their teaching since AI is present. And again, this was an open-ended question. So most common answer would be no changes applied or very minimal changes.
Wow.
Yeah, which shows that this is, even though it's been around for quite a while now, doesn't seem like we have made a big stance and a big change in this situation. But then right after that, it would be that they have become more efficient in preparing teaching materials, which goes to the usefulness of the tool again. Some of them say that they have redesigned the assessment mainly because they're worried about students actually doing things themselves.
And that's pretty low.
Yeah, 15%. You would hope that it would be more than that.
Definitely more than no changes, right?
Yeah. And that's something that needs to happen, really.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think in the next couple of years, we'll see big changes in how we assess people.
Right, yes. Myself, I have started to include some of the changes in assessment because I would be doing the assessment and realizing that the issue of trust was appearing all the time. And I was not comfortable in that situation, so I felt like I need to do something with regards to that. Yeah.
So it's not an issue at all.
Definitely. Because also the purpose of assessment should not be like out of every purpose we can think of assessment, it should not be having issues with your students and like questioning your students all the time. That should not be the issue. Yeah. So with other with regards to other changes that have been implemented, maybe they have changed some aspects of methodology. They can now create more elaborate tasks or more elaborate content. They are now restricting or controlling the use of AI tools by students, which, of course, before it was not an issue because they were not common. And some others say that they have made more, put more emphasis in class activities, which require students to speak. So less of lectures and more of class debates, discussions, and commenting on the ethical aspects of these tools within the class context.
Yeah, I still find this a little bit problematic because they're really low, the numbers, except for more efficient preparation of teaching materials, which doesn't address the relationship and the policies and the rules and all of that.
Like the majority of these instructors who were responding said either I didn't make any changes or, it helps me prep for class. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And, there's a small group of instructors who are above the curve, perhaps, that are getting the jump on trying to have more in-person conversations in class or this sort of thing.
Yeah, a little bit more thoughtfulness.
Yeah, but that's a very small percentage.
This is a small percentage, yeah. And probably this is happening around the world, as we said at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, I think the issue is very common all over. Also, the technology is kind of arriving everywhere at the same time because of the globalized world we live in.
So fast.
Yes, very, very fast. And every day is a new conversation, a new tool is coming up and...
Yeah. And, I know as a teacher, just preparing all the content for a term, it's so much work, like the amount of hours that you put into one lesson. So I think that's once again connected to not making any changes, but eventually you'll have to make those changes.
Right. Yeah. Also, I understand if you remember a previous question, they said that AI doesn't change anything because AI will never be the teacher, it will never substitute the role of the teacher, which we can agree on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that no changes need to be applied, because it certainly changes the way students learn, even us, right? We work, the way we work, the way we learn, the way we communicate, everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, even though the teacher is not going to be taken out of the picture,
right?
How the teacher interacts with the student, how it creates materials, how it increases the learning experience, that needs to change.
Definitely. And we need to address that because, as we said, the results about the question, do you think it changes the relationship between teachers and students, mostly point to yes, right? So it is something that we need to address. The issue perhaps is that we don't know how, but of course we're all learning along the way, but it is something we need to address.
Yeah, so maybe now we can talk about the solutions.
Yeah, we kind of have been already, but
Yeah.
just to recap them, perhaps.
What could we do to mitigate this issue?
So yeah, I mean, there hasn't been, at least at UBC, a strict rule coming down from the top about, what stance you need to take on this, issue of changes to teaching and how you're going to take a stance on that. So it is sort of up to you to take a stance, but hopefully this kind of connects back to everything we've talked about so far in terms of literacy, in terms of getting training, in terms of being intentional about your use cases. You kind of have all of that together informed. You can take a stance, and then the last step is just make that really, really clear to students. As a student, please tell me exactly what your policy is.
Definitely.
Or else it's really intimidating.
Yeah, so it kind of, I think what you're saying is sort of do different actions to develop your own criteria, your own stance, and then the result will be evident because you have been making informed decisions, right? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. And then, of course, the communication part. And that communication can come from, talking and saying something at the beginning of class, but also in the design of your assignments. Eduardo, you mentioned a lot about how you're saying like those assignment design is going to change a lot. And that can be a way of communicating to your students what the expectations are.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I would say have the conversations, right? Be it with your students, with your colleagues, with everyone. It is okay and it's natural that we are not sure what we have to do because everything is very uncertain. And when you don't have strict guidelines from the organizational level, it can be hard to navigate because you feel like a lot of room is left to you, and that can be hard. Sometimes it's easy to just follow exactly what they say, right? But it's helpful and it's nice that we have that freedom of choice and we can do the things that we think make sense based on informed decisions, I would say. So I would say definitely have the conversations with yourself, with your colleagues, with your students, with everyone. Look for training, like reach out and ask for, once you identify what you feel like you might not know that well, some of your insecurities, what you would feel like you would need to learn more about, reach out and look for the training and the resources, I would say, definitely.
Yeah, while there might not be strict rules, there are principles from the university that we're going to link in the description. And we also have a podcast episode on the guidelines, like we said, and hopefully we'll have a future podcast episode about designing assignments with AI in mind. So look out for that.
Yeah, that is a big topic. So we definitely want to have an entire episode for that. That's coming up. Okay, Laia. So thank you so much for joining us. This is very fascinating. Is this in English so people can read this research in English?
Yes. So we do have a website of the project, and there you will be able to find all the results we're going to be sharing, not just from this data, but from the other parts of the project we just said, more related to the policies, to what students think. This is ongoing, so it's going to be coming up within the few months. And then we're also doing some webinars, but those are going to be in Spanish. So if there's any Spanish-speaking communities out there, of course you can see those, but all the resources we're going to have translated into like the Spanish local languages and also English. So it's going to be available in the website. Yes, and we're going to have it linked down below the description of the video.
Excellent. Fantastic. And we also put links to the resources that we have at UBC and the LDDI resources. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next podcast episode. Bye now.